You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. If you've logged into TikTok or Instagram in recent weeks, you may have heard something like this.
There are no international ships at the shipping ports in Seattle right now.
I've walked the whole port of Seattle, and there are no shipping containers. It is empty.
So, not a single international cargo ship at the port of Seattle. The port is effectively dead.
Look at this. One lonely cargo ship. You know what's not on that ship? Cargo. It's just parked. What's it called? Flourish Diva. Oh no. Diva down. Diva is not flourishing. Diva is empty.
Social media videos have been popping up claiming that Seattle's port is empty, and Seattleites are pointing the finger at the continuous threat of new tariffs. But is this actually the case? Is the port empty, and are tariffs to blame? KUOW labor and economy reporter Monica Nickesburg headed to the port to find out, and she joins me now. Monica, always good to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Always good to be here.
So you covered this for the newest episode of KUOW's economy podcast, Booming, and we'll get into what you saw at the port in just a moment. We'll just build some suspense there. But first, I want to lay some groundwork. I mean, U.S. tariff policy has been fluid, I think the word might be, if we're looking for something uncertain from day to day. Where do things stand right now when it comes to the taxes that are levied on imports?
Very fluid. So right now, there is a 10% kind of flat tariff across most countries, with some exceptions, of course. The big recent change was China and the U.S. de-escalated their extremely high tariffs down to 30% on imports from China, 10% on exports from the U.S. That's for 90 days while they try to make a deal. But that's as of this taping. I make no promises for even, the moment we get out of here, because this is changing so fast.
So you headed down to the port recently to find out, is it really empty right now? Monica, what did you find?
It wasn't empty when I went.
Wow, so you're debunking these social media videos.
Well, kind of. The thing about these social media detectives is when they look at the port, they probably saw something and they're paying so much more attention to the port than we ever usually do. But you can't just take a snapshot and have what you see be all that you get with something as complicated as international shipping and logistics. So at the time that a lot of these videos were going viral, the port officials said things were kind of business as usual. In fact, there were still a backlog of containers from people shipping stuff into the country, trying to get ahead of the tariffs, trying to get it here before they took effect. So maybe it could have been a scenario where we had this big backlog and then cargo volume dropped, but it sort of evened out to seem normal. That was the situation when I went.
And so what you see is not always what you get here. Have port officials seen changes in business since the president announced these tariffs?
So, yes, over the past week, things were just starting to shift, and they did attribute that to the tariffs. So some of the early indications that we saw were what's called blank sailings. This is when a ship that would typically stop at our ports just skips over it because it's not worth the cost of docking, because they don't have enough containers to make up the moorage and stuff like that. So we were just starting to see potential impacts of the trade war.
And how trade dependent is Washington state? If trade slows down or there's continued instability here, how hard can that potentially be of a hit to Seattle or to Washington as a whole?
We're very trade dependent. We are the closest port to Asia. China is one of our top trading partners. In terms of stuff that we import, experts say that the effects wouldn't be so different from the rest of the country, the kind of stuff that you've been hearing about a lot, like higher prices, fewer goods on the shelves that you're used to seeing. But as an export state, that could be a particularly acute effect for us. We export a lot of agriculture products and a lot of airplanes, with Boeing being here. And this stuff is all really interconnected. So if imports go down, if there are fewer containers arriving at our port, there's nowhere for farmers to put their goods to export them back to Asia. And they can't just wait a couple of weeks if they're exporting perishable goods. They'll go bad.
Yeah. So that's a huge potential impact that we're going to be watching for. Fellow KUOW reporter and Booming co-host Joshua McNichols spoke to local businesses attached to the ports, specifically a local trucking company. What did Joshua learn about how this uncertainty is affecting business here?
So this is another one of those sort of canaries in the coal mine. Early warning signs were flashing at this trucking company that he went to. And the port says that truck transactions, which is containers unloaded by truckers basically, are down 16% year over year. That's tough for these truckers because they operate like their own little small business owners. And so their costs are the same even if they have less work. They have to pay for their trucks, for their insurance, and they're making changes like switching from unloading containers at the port and just taking them short distances to long haul trucking or reducing their insurance in some cases.
That's a huge disruption for them. Monica, so these China tariffs are set at 30% for most imports from China during this 90-day pause, we should say. After that, things are looking quite unpredictable. I was just checking, and in less than a week, we are going to hit the halfway point in Trump's 90-day pause for those reciprocal so-called tariffs that added taxes as high as 50% on imports from 150 countries. Trump said that countries that don't get a deal done with the U.S. are going to just be told in a few weeks what their tariff rates are. So massive uncertainty there. I mean, what do you think happens next in Washington's trade-dependent world, these industries that depend on trade here in Washington state?
It's impossible to predict. Like you said, the only certainty is uncertainty. But uncertainty is bad for business. We know that. We hear that from businesses all the time, that even if it's not the policy that they want, they need to at least know what the policy will be so that they can make plans. The same is true for shipping and logistics for importers and exporters. It takes a long time for ships to cross the water. These plans need to be made well in advance. This is the time when companies in the U.S. are stocking up on Christmas supplies. And without knowing what's going to happen next, you could see a paralysis, which slows down economic activity and potentially could hurt jobs here.
Monica Nickesburg is KUOW's labor and economy reporter. She's also the co-host of Booming, KUOW's economics podcast that you can find on your favorite podcast app. Catch the latest episode to hear more about what's happening in Washington's shipping industry. And you can search for Booming, of course, on the NPR One app, anywhere you get your podcasts. Monica, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.